Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline Leavitt, the co-host of A Mighty Blaze, which began the day of lockdown. It was our attempt to connect authors, independent bookstores, and readers all together. Today is incredibly special. I want to show you this book, Chaos, Creativity, and Completion. This is an extraordinary book, and I want to read you what it says about this book. And we have amazing people here to talk about it. Okay, it's New Approaches to Writing and ADHD. It's a collection of 15 extraordinary essays to help and guide writers into embracing rather than masking neurodivergence. The great thing about this book is that it shows many ways of finding writing practices that actually work in very different ways. I also want to read this description from the book. A rising number of ADHD diagnoses, particularly among adults, is not only confirmed by medical studies, but also borne out across social media. The essays in this book, Chaos, Creativity, Completion, reflect the ways poets, novelists, memoirists, filmmakers, and others can engage their ADHD with creativity. So I want to give a little shout out to the people here. First, we have Lisa Van Orman Hadley. She is the author of Irreversible Things, an autobiographical novel and stories. And we have Chloe Martinez, who is the author of the poetry collection, 10,000 Selves, and a translator of Songs of Mirabai. And of course, we have Rebecca Makkai, who is the author of The Great Believers, which is on everybody's list of the best books of all times, forever. And so I want to welcome all of you, and I want to tell just a few housekeeping things.
Wait, and Rob, you need to introduce Robin.
Oh, Robin, I'm so sorry. Where is Robin? Okay, Robin.
Here, I can do this too.
And my friend, Robin Black. Robin is a fantastic novelist, and she's the author of, wait, I have it right here. She's the author of the novels If I Loved You, I Would Tell You This, Life Drawing, and more. She has a great essay in this collection called The Third Word is Shame, which is really important for all writers, because I sometimes feel we're all really drowning in shame. So a few housekeeping details for everybody. There's a chat on the right. I swear to God, I put up all these links, and then I found out I was in the wrong StreamYard links. So they are gone, but I can tell you what they are. Bookshop.org. You can buy this book there, or you can go to your favorite indie bookstore, which we always recommend. Also, if you have any questions or comments for anybody, just pop it in the chat and we'll get to it. So first thing, I want to thank all of you for being here. And I want to say that this book is, I've been underlining pages and folding back things. I didn't think that I had ADHD, but in reading this book, it spoke to me on such a huge and deep level. So let's get definitions out of the way. I'm going to put all of you up here, and whoever wants to talk can speak. Let's get definitions. What is ADHD? What does it look like? It's one of those catch-all phrases, it seems to me, like everybody says, oh, I have OCD or I have HTH, but I think it's more complicated than that. So please tell us what it is exactly and how it's diagnosed or misdiagnosed.
I can jump in.
Okay, great.
It's this is very different from the occasional inability to pay attention or from distraction, that comes on an adult onset, distraction from the modern world. People with ADHD almost always have had ADHD their entire lives. And it is the inability to control your attention, or the great difficulty to control your attention. And that might mean difficulty pulling your attention away from something, actually, that you're hyper-focused on. It might mean switching tasks, switching between two things. It very often means a real deep inability to force yourself to concentrate on something that you are not intrinsically interested in. I liken it to like walking my obstreperous dog, who sometimes wants to go, sometimes she's stopping and I can't make her go. And sometimes she's walking along just lovely. But that it's that, if she's the attention, right? It's that, it's not that she can't stop and notice things. It's not that she can't do things. It's that I can't always get her to do what I want her to do. And that's how I feel about my own attention span.
And
What? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, my understanding is that there's also, for many people, a strong temporal element.
Mm-hmm.
So people with ADD, for example, the classic situation of a child misbehaving in class, misbehaving in big quotes, partly because of attention issues and being distractible, but also because people with attention deficit, which it's a question of deficit is always the right word for this, don't have a sense of consequence necessarily to their actions. So they don't sequence time in the same way. So they're not necessarily thinking, if I do this thing, I'm going to get in trouble. They're just thinking, I'm doing this thing right now. And that's a big part of it for a lot of people when they're young, I think, is not kind of getting that learning curve of causality in a sense.
Why are there so many late in life diagnoses?
So,
are people just becoming more aware of it, or is there less? Robin, you talk so eloquently about shame in your essay, or is this just something where people are less ashamed of any kind of neurodiversity?
When I was diagnosed, which is 20-ish years ago, when I was in my low 40s, the average diagnosis age for women was 40. And it tended to be women whose children were diagnosed with ADHD and who sat in the office going, hey, wait a minute. That sounds like me. I thought she was just like me. I didn't know we had this thing. So I think Rebecca talks about this really eloquently in her introduction, that, certainly when I was growing up, and I'm by far the oldest one of the people here representing the book, people didn't think about little girls having ADD.
Yeah, not at all.
And for a long time, they thought about little girls having ADD as a particular presentation, which was inattentive type, where they would just be kind of like off in space. And the impulse control stuff and the, again, quote unquote misbehavior, people just didn't associate that with girls.
I can say, like, for me, I am verbally hyperactive. I have a hard time with not interrupting. I have a hard time, holding my tongue. And I'm hyperactive in these little tiny movements that are probably imperceptible to other people. Fidgeting. And I was, I was called spacey in school. That was not a behavior problem. I would get in trouble because, my work wouldn't show up or be crumpled or, that kind of thing. But in terms of disrupting class, it sometimes happened. It rarely happened. And what has happened for a very long time is that with young women, it's either not noticed at all, it's dismissed as something else. She just doesn't care about her work. She's lazy. She's a daydreamer. With children of color, especially young men of color, it tends to be treated as a behavioral issue. And at least, in past years, hopefully that's getting better, not looked at as this might be something we need to see a specialist about. Let's figure out what's going on here. So it was all, I sometimes joke, it's like every little boy named Jason in the 1970s and 80s. Every Jason was diagnosed with ADHD because all the Jasons were throwing spitballs, all these little white boys. And that's who it was about. And it was a revelation for me. It's a revelation for so many of us to realize this was going on the whole time, right under our noses.
Rebecca, you also said in your foreword, which stopped me in my tracks, you were talking about zoning out while your body is still there. And as soon as I read that, I thought, that's just like writing. That's like how I feel when I'm writing. Do you feel how alike are those two states for someone with ADHD, or does it depend on the person?
It depends on the person, right? So for me, I think the reason that we in this community, we're hearing so much about it is that a lot of writers, a lot of creative people have ADHD. And there are two sides to that. One is maybe, seeking out a career that is a fit versus trying to do something data entry or, whatever. The other thing is that there are skills that come with this kind of thinking. There's this rhizomatic thinking, right? Of like, one thing reminds you of 55 other things. That is creativity. And, what I was doing there, zoning out. We were zoning out in ballet class and like looking at the infinite reflections in the mirrors and like coming up with a whole world, like with an ad campaign about the infinite bar ballet, like just stuff is going on in your head, right? Because I was bored out of my mind. And very often, I am both participating in the world and writing at the same time in my head. That doesn't mean that when I sit down to write, I can always laser focus, because sometimes I'm writing and I'm thinking about, the other stuff that I should be doing too. But it's, the ability to kind of be in one place, be imaginatively very much in a completely different place. That goes both ways. That's part of ADHD. It's part of writing.
This is an illustration from the book. This is from Douglas Kearney. And it's you can see like how the brain bounces from one thing to another. This particular book actually has a really interesting inception story, and I would love for Lisa and Chloe to tell us about it. It started at a panel, right?
Yes. So exactly what Robin described is what happened to me. I was diagnosed with ADHD at 42. After my son was diagnosed, it was during the pandemic when everything just suddenly felt untenable. And so I received my diagnosis and I started thinking about like how ADHD has shown up in my writing, not just my writing practices and the way I write, but also like what I write about, the form my stories took. And so I looked for like resources on that, and I couldn't find anything about writing and ADHD other than a few online articles, probably one or two of which were by Robin. Like those were some of the first things I found.
Me too.
And so I proposed this AWP panel, and I think it was just like the right thing at the right time. There was so much interest in it. And so that led to the book. And
then we got to spend the last couple of years like thinking about ADHD and writing, reaching out to all these amazing writers and getting to see what they made. Doug Kearney's incredible, visual and
it's incredible. It is. It's completely incredible. How did you select your writers? How did you go about doing that?
That was tricky because it's like, how do you identify other writers with ADHD unless,
right.
I mean, I suspect that certain people have ADHD. I want to just be like, oh, you seem like you might be one of us. And so a lot of word of mouth, like Chloe, I had posted something online about my diagnosis, and Chloe kind of quietly texted me and said, I have ADHD too.
But I think even a couple years ago, so many people were not talking about it and writing about it. And Robin and Rebecca were two of the few people that we found who had actually written about their own diagnoses. And so many of other contributors was just sort of word of mouth, like asking around on writer networks, do you know writers who have ADHD who we could look at their work, and trying to find people. And now that the book is out, I feel like we know so many more people, and I run into so many more people who say, oh, I really connect with this. And I think, oh, I love your writing. I wish we had like another volume so we could include even more ADHD writers.
Will you have another volume?
Not that I know of,
that'd be cool.
It would be cool.
It would be cool. I wanted to ask you about the writing techniques and the prompts in the book are spectacular. They're great for any writer, whether you have ADHD or not. What I wanted to know is if you could talk about how they differ from the usual kind of writing instruction. Why do they work for people with ADHD?
I mean, we just kind of left it up to each individual author to come up with their own prompt. And I mean, the prompts are as creative and varied as the essays.
They're great. They're really interesting. They're really interesting.
See what people came up with. And we didn't give any kind of guidelines for the prompt other than maybe a page-ish.
Like, don't go too long. And yeah,
Yeah.
they're a window into writing process, you know, from a bunch of different writers. And I do think so much of the advice and the prompts and the conversation about developing a writing process that works for you, the focus of the book is ADHD, but I think it's of use to anyone. Everybody's struggling, right? ADHD people are dealing with an extra layer of challenge. And so maybe there's this extra pressure to figure out even more creative ways to do things, but can be useful for anyone.
As I read through the other essays in the book, I realized, because mine did focus on shame more than on, how to get your writing practice together. And I realized that there really are these, at least two realms of challenge for people with ADHD, whether they're writers or whoever they are. And one of them is that very practical, I don't know how to organize the files on my computer. I don't know how to, I'm always afraid I'm going to lose student papers. I think somebody actually mentions doing that in here. So there's the very practical, like, how do you do that? And how do you think about 300 pages all at once when your brain is sparking like that? But there's also the other side, which I think in some ways is what drew me to write about ADHD in the beginning of my process. And I started in like 2010, I guess, when my first book came out, which is the shame piece, the emotional weight of it, the incredible freedom and relief that I think so many of us have felt with actual diagnoses. Not because we're suddenly going to know how to color code things, because I can tell you we're not. I missed AWP, but I was supposed to be on an ADHD panel. And in my little thing I was going to say, I say, my house is littered with books about how to organize. They're all over the place. And, my desk, this is my husband's desk. It's very tidy. My desk is just, a mishmash of failed enterprises in organization. But still, the most profound impact of having ADHD on me has been the emotional piece, the shame piece, how that interacts with the exposure of being a writer, the push and pull between wanting to hide because you feel like there's something really wrong with you and wanting to speak because you want people to know that you're not that awful person they think you are because you seem so weird or different. And sitting here watching us all talk, it reminded me that after a certain amount of time of being in writers' workshops, I learned to put a watch in front of myself, and I wouldn't let myself speak for 7 minutes because otherwise I would just go blah, 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 blah. And so
Really?
they're watching the clock going, okay, I think my minutes are up. I can talk again. And that's what Rebecca was talking about, that, I'm going to talk. I'm going to say I have the impulse. And that's where, for some of us, where the H comes out, not that we're running around the room, but that we can't shut up.
But what's wrong with that? What would be wrong with that? Just
It's like people judge you for talking too much.
But isn't that their problem?
It's
If they do judge you?
not fair to the people who hang back more, who are really intimidated by that, and maybe who have something smart to say that you should listen to.
Okay. Yeah. There's a few other things in your essay that I wanted to talk about, Robin. You gave the metaphor of like emotions are like food in the fridge. You have to let them out, otherwise they sour. And as soon as I read that, I thought that's so true for a lot of different kinds of people. I mean, that felt so true for me. I just, and you also said that writers often are people who are silenced at a young age, and that's why we speak out on the page. I thought both of those things were extraordinary and applicable for just about every writer I know. Why is it hard to get those emotions out for someone with ADHD? Is it being afraid of what people are going to think, or?
I mean, my experience, and I'm obviously really interested in what others have to say, but my experience is that I grew up with such a profound, ingrained, primitive, infantile sense of myself as just being off, getting it wrong, saying the wrong thing. Numbers of us wrote about being dressed wrong, not brushing our hair right, you know, not showering enough, being bad at personal tending, saying the thing where everyone looks at you like, oh, you're that weird kid. And so I think that one of the reasons so many writers are people who have had that experience is because you do begin to become an observer more and build worlds in your head and build theories about how the way the world works and why people do what they do that you don't necessarily just kind of share with everybody. And I do think that that urge then builds to share it. And I think that is for many of us where the writing impulse comes from.
Right. I think so too. I also wanted to ask you, Rebecca. You wrote about. You said it's busy in there, and that really got to me because my therapist used to tell me that I had a really busy brain. Is this not a good thing? I mean, it seems like all of these things can be good things, and also, you need to control it, obviously, but I can think of nothing more wonderful than having a lot of busy thoughts going on in there. Would you?
Yeah, no, I mean, right. It's I'm grateful for this kind of very fertile sort of mind. At the same time, this is where you have a lot of people, especially undiagnosed people, with alcohol and drug dependencies. Because how do you quiet your brain down at the end of the day? You have, there's distraction when you are driving, not a good thing. So I can think of many instances where this is not what you want to have going on. The capability, right? This is the thing, to have the capability of a lot of things going on in your brain is one thing. Controlling when and how that happens is another. And if someone has the capacity to have all these thoughts and then is able to shut it off and say, I'm going to focus now, that is great for them. They do not have ADHD probably. Where, I am supposed to be concentrating on someone saying something extremely serious. I am going through the motions and I'm thinking of 75 different things that are not the person in front of me. That's not great. And that's a benign example, right? When those thoughts, as with all of us, some of those thoughts are not all pleasant. When you mix this with something like depression or with anxiety, which it very often crosses over with, the 70 million thoughts you have racing through your head are horrifying. This is not all like, wouldn't it be fun if, I wrote a story about this. This is you trying to go to sleep and you can't stop picturing shelving units crushing your baby. Right?
There's also, one of you may know the term for this, but it involves the word rejection. People with ADD, either because of neurology or because of life history, tend to anticipate rejection, interpret everything as rejection. If you can look at a situation where it could be that maybe the other person just was grumpy because they had a bad day, you're going to decide it's because they hate you and you've done something terrible. And maybe you're not as good at remembering everything you might have done wrong because you were doing so many things. So I'm very pro openness about all of it. I'm very pro, associative thinking and lots of ideas and thinking outside the box. But I also think it's important to realize that it is something with which people struggle also.
Right.
Yeah.
It's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
for me, it's like, which first, the chicken or the egg? Because I wrote in my essay that it's been estimated that by age 10, kids with ADHD have already received 20,000 corrective or negative messages from their teachers. And it's like, oh, am I feeling rejection sensitivity because I have literally been rejected again and again? Or is this something that's like part of the diagnosis and I was predisposed to.
And
Right.
that brings up like how much this conversation is interesting. It's working around this contextual question, right? So much of ADHD, I think, is contextual, and there's a real cultural moment now where people are claiming ADHD as an identity and talking about it as a type of neurodivergence rather than a disorder, right? Because disorder indicates something is wrong with you that must be fixed. Neurodivergence indicates you have a different kind of brain, and most of the world is neurotypical. And so in the context of neurotypicality, neurodivergent people are going to have these struggles. And it is interesting, Robin, the thing you said about like turning to writing as this place that's almost an answer to those struggles really interests me. I do think like as writers, we're all people who love the kind of like micro control that we have over language, this world that we get to make in the written world, in the written word, we can shape however we like, and we can revise, and we can get it right? For people who I think have a lifetime of like saying the wrong thing or interrupting because we're excited or missing a piece of conversation because we were drifting off and we lost track of it, right? Getting social cues wrong. Writing is a place where we get like a redo. We can make it in our own way, and we can make it perfect.
Are there new discoveries coming out about this all the time? I mean, I wonder if each of you can talk about how you were diagnosed.
We can do that. Yeah. I don't know about new discoveries. I think I wish, there's like slightly better medications and there's more recognition, right? But I don't think that they're necessarily figuring out new stuff every day.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. I feel like Robin has this wonderful book of essays about writing called Crash Course that we were in conversation about it in Chicago way back when it came out. And at the time reading it, and she was talking about writing with ADHD, and I was like, wow, that must be so rough. I cannot imagine having ADHD and trying to be a writer. Oh my God. And then hearing, various other people. There's a couple of podcasters who listening to podcasts about other things, but would reference their ADHD. And at the same time that I'm like, oh, her brain works a lot like mine. And then for me, this was, I have an 18-year-old with a lot of neurospiciness going on. And my diagnosis was clearer than hers, actually. As I started looking at this diagnosis, this is just me on my computer going, oh my God. I taught elementary school for 12 years. And
You
I missed
did?
every single kid who should have been diagnosed. I missed every single one. There were kids who were already diagnosed. There's little boys who can't sit in their chairs. And, I did not look at a single kid and go, I bet that. And also, I was teaching in a Montessori school. I went to Montessori school myself, which 99%, this is a positive thing. It's a very accommodating atmosphere. So I could do 15 different things one day, and the next day just write a play. And the next day I'm outside, and the next day I'm doing my math again. Which is kind of then what adult life is like, and I feel like I actually am easier on myself than a lot of people who sat through day after day at a desk in a traditional school. At the same time, you're maybe slightly more likely to miss the diagnosis because this kid isn't hitting their head against the conventions all the time. But I missed this as a teacher. And then, finally looking at this list and reading some of the, kind of OG books. I can't remember the one that one guy wrote, the classic, whatever that one. And just going, yep. Oh my God. And your life kind of flashes before you, right? Of like, oh my God, that time that this happened. And oh my God, I thought this was, and this was about 5 or 6 years ago. So it's been quick since then.
Does it change? Does it change every year? Do you feel yourself changing with it, Rebecca?
So there are two different things. One is that perimenopause really exacerbates a lot of things, especially brain fog. So this is another reason women might not get diagnosed until later is it's not that it's suddenly appearing, but the dial is turned up.
Always been there.
Okay. And okay, this is what's going on. So there's that. But no, for me, it's the changes have to do more with getting on medication, noticing right now I'm having bad asthma, so I'm on prednisone, so I can't be on my meds, and then going like, wow.
Your prednisone can make you high.
Oh my God, my desk right now. So there's that. And then there's also just the slow realizations about ways I've been masking forever, about ways I could be asking for help that I haven't been asking for help, about ways that I can forgive myself or lean into strengths that are here. It's also for me, there's this ongoing process of understanding my own kid and how her version of this is different from mine. So there's a lot of that, but it's not like you wake up every day with a new brain.
Right. What about, I'd like to hear from you, Lisa and Chloe, like what was it like for you when you were diagnosed? And did you just go to a doctor because you felt something's not right? Or was it suggested that you go, oh, Lisa's shaking her head, I want to hear that story.
Yeah. Well, I already talked a little bit about it, but it was during the pandemic. I was doing therapy online in my living room while my kids were doing Zoom school downstairs and screaming. My husband was like working in the other room. And so I was in therapy, and all of a sudden a truck went past on my street, and I looked over at the truck, and then I came back to my therapist and I was like, I'm sorry. Like when my attention gets drawn away, it's really hard for me to come back, and I have no idea what we were talking about. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, and there were a lot of pieces leading up to this, but I was like, oh my God, do I have ADHD? and she was like, oh, maybe. And like she had said previously in a session that our sessions felt like a game of whack-a-mole.
Oh.
And I love my therapist. It wasn't a fun day. But she said, my other clients who have ADHD describe it as having 1,000 tabs open on their computer at the same time in their brain. And I was like, doesn't everyone feel that way? I thought,
yeah.
And so, and then I went and saw a psychiatrist and got a diagnosis. And then I texted my best friend growing up, and I thought this was going to be a huge revelation. And I said, I have ADHD. And she wrote back, Lisa, of course you do. And I was like, why didn't I know? This was going to be like this big reveal.
Everyone knew.
Yeah.
My diagnosis is a little bit different from some of the others. I write about this in my essay a little bit. I was diagnosed in my late 20s, after I had been like successfully hacking my way through academia for many years. And this question of like, girls and women, I think, getting ignored. I think often there are lots of girls and women out there who have inattentive type ADHD who are seen as a little dreamy and scatterbrained, but generally do well in school, really academically curious and successful. And I was one of those kids. Secretly, I was also doing like double work. Like the further I went in school, the more I was doing extra work to do everything late at night. I was figuring out that I needed to like write papers all night with my friends next to me, which is body doubling, which is a hack, right? I was using workarounds before I knew what they were. And they were working for me, although it was very exhausting. And it wasn't until I started my PhD that about like one semester into the PhD, I just hit a wall because I had gone to a level of challenge where I'd maxed out all of those hacks and accommodations. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that. But after I, spent a lot of time with a therapist asking her why I was like so depressed and why everything seemed so hard. I'd worked so hard to be in this program to study stuff I was really excited about. She was like, let's go get you screened for ADHD. I didn't know anything about it. It was a big revelation to me.
What is the screening like? Is it just a series of questions, or are they watching your behaviors?
It depends.
It really depends, and that changes over time. Let's say that has really developed. When I got mine, which was in the early 2000s, it was really just somebody giving you a quiz and evaluating your responses and deciding. When I took my daughter to get screened a couple years ago, we went to USC, where they have a really great program where they're like training grad students and doing the screening in a really detailed way. And I wanted that for her because I wanted to make sure I was not projecting my ADHD onto her. I thought, let's just make really sure. And so she went for like several days of testing, and they did all kinds of tests ranging from conversations and questionnaires and having her write something under time to doing kind of like computer games that had to do with like attention. And so they were able to really give this detailed picture and say, she has all this intellectual capability that's very strong. And then also her attention is really challenged. She really cannot keep up with these attention pieces. So that was interesting to me to see how detailed and fine-grained that could be.
I was given the computer test.
I was also.
And it was fascinating because you are on a computer, at least the one I took, and it was showing you these things, and you were supposed, I think it was like different colors of shapes, and you were supposed to identify them. And at the end of the, and also there was a camera that's measuring your micro movements. So it's looking at your feet. And like, it was really interesting because I got everything correct on the test, but the variation between my response, like I would get distracted and I would take like several seconds to choose the right one. And then I would get bored, and yeah, it was fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's interesting in this. Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead. This is fascinating.
So when my daughter first went in, she was something like 10 years old, maybe. This is one reason that there need to be different ways of testing. One thing about a lot of people with ADHD is that when something's exciting and new, you can absolutely pay attention to it, right? So they had her do these things like memorize the string of numbers and say it back. And it was new and exciting, so of course she could do it. And she could even concentrate on something like computer stuff for quite a while because it was like, I want to do well. This is timed. This is so exciting. But you give that same kid, say you have a week to complete this task. Oh my God, meltdown and no time, like it's a very different story. So she came out of that original testing with this tester saying, I don't see the ADHD. And
So interesting.
It was so clear to me, but for a million reasons. And ultimately ended up with, in conversations where it was much more like she's, seeing a psychiatrist where it was a dialogue and able to give kind of the narrative version of what her life is like and what she's struggling with. And this is someone who gets to see her week after week, sitting there on the couch, zoning out, doing, and is able to go, yes, this kid has ADHD. So it, I think that, I don't know if there's, in terms of like what the APA says or whatever, but like in my experience, there's been a variety of ways of diagnosis.
I honestly think if somebody just saw my bedroom, they
oh my
would
God,
know.
well, yeah.
I mean,
Why? What does your bedroom look like? Is it just stuff?
What doesn't my bedroom look like? It's, and it took me into my 40s to do this. And I had to argue to get tested because I didn't present like someone who had ADD to someone who had never been inside my house.
Right.
Or who hadn't looked at my high school grades because I did not cover well. I graduated 84th out of a class of 100 people, but had, great test scores and the whole, like the classic, and I just think any diagnostician who walked into my home would just say, somebody here has ADD. And that's my manifestation. My primary manifestation is the management of physical objects. And physical objects can be computer files. I mean, they don't have to be literal physical objects, but they can be, the dishes. I mean, my husband has said to me, do you even see them? I said, no, I really don't. I don't see them. I have gone through periods of life. You ask what my bedroom looks like. It looks like I decided to do an art installation in which you carpet your room with clothing. I have gone through periods where I've said, okay, this is it. You're only allowed to have 8 pieces of clothing. Because how many black shirts can you buy because you can't find your other 50 black shirts? I mean, Caroline, I know
I have like 50
that's your thing. But, it for other people, it's always being late. I am never late. I am obsessively on time. I don't miss deadlines. I did as a child, and I think it scarred me so badly that I will never miss a deadline. If my husband and I are going to be a minute late to something, or my daughter and I just start like panicking. But there are people who have ADD where I know I'm going to sit there for half an hour waiting for them. And I have to be as forgiving toward that as I try to be toward myself for the fact that I don't know where my keys are. I don't know where my wallet is. I don't know where, I didn't know where this book was. I didn't, so it does manifest differently in different ways. And the thing that made me insist on a diagnosis is when I switched from short stories to a novel.
That's so interesting. Was that overwhelming? Did that feel?
It was overwhelming. And I couldn't, short stories, I could they were little, I think of them as like little clock gears. And I could contain the structure in my head, and I could contain the time frame. And when I made the change over to a novel, I was completely overwhelmed and I couldn't do it. And I finally did. My ADD trick for it was I said, well, I can't imagine writing 250 pages, but I can imagine writing 50. So I wrote 50 at a time and mailed them to a particular friend, a writer friend, not for her to read or comment on, but just for her to say, atta girl, good job, do the next 50. Because I had to break it down into manageable pieces. But that was when I said to a therapist I had at the time, and there's no absence of us all having therapists, which is good, I think. I'm very pro. But I said to her, I know you don't think I have ADD, but I do. Mm-hmm. And she sent me to diagnosticians at the University of Pennsylvania who 20 years ago were using the computer programs. And I was like classic, off the charts.
Mm-hmm. That's extraordinary. There seems to be like a huge amount of creativity that comes out of people who have ADHD, and which to me seems like such a wonderful thing to have from this. Does it increase creativity, do you think?
I think so.
I think it's going to depend on the person, right? I think you're going to have people, right? Like for all of us here, we're writers. We found a way
to use that. You actually have an audience question. Usually people are very shy, so this is a good thing. Somebody asked, what advice would you give anyone with ADHD? I would say, like, what is the best piece of advice you would give somebody to make somebody who has this feel better about themselves and feel like this could be a strength?
It's a really broad question.
I would say throw away everything you think you've been told about how to be a writer and like what your process should look like, and trust yourself that you have probably already found really wonderful ways to work with your brain. And you may have thought like, this is wrong. I'm supposed to write every day. I'm supposed to write at this time. But like, I don't. I go long periods without writing, and then I'll have like a burst of writing nonstop for a couple of weeks. And it's taken me a long time to be okay with that and just say, that's how I work.
And I would extend that even to the first sentence you said, and there, I don't remember, but it was something like, give up expectations about what kind of writer you ought to be, and say that, aside from being decent to other people and the basic sense of humanity, also give up on a lot of the ideas of what kind of person you ought to be. That I will never have a tidy home. And that isn't because I'm lazy or slovenly or bad or any of those things. It's just a reality. And at the age I'm at, I've kind of had to say, I got to stop fighting for this. because it's never going to happen. And my energies are much better directed
Right.
doing the things I'm good at rather than trying to do the things that I am simply not wired to do. I would
Right.
also say talk to other people who have this, because you are so not alone.
Yeah, it's one of those. I think there are things in life, and especially just in the modern era, and as Americans, that like we just have this sense of like, well, you can fix anything about yourself, right? Like you don't like your face, you can fix your face. You don't like, and you know, that there are still some things, thank God, that we kind of just accept, like your height, right? Like I'm 5'7", I will always be 5'7". It doesn't matter if I wish I were shorter or taller, other than getting older.
Right.
It's not going to happen, right? And there's no sense beating myself up for not being taller, right? There's zero work to that. And I think trying to put these neurodivergences in that category, rather than like I can eat healthy, or that category, right? Of like I can always be better. Just saying like this is a thing about myself I can't change, and I can live in a healthy way with it. I can use it well, right? Like I can use my height to, you know, do yoga and not try to be a basketball player. I can, you know, I can remember what size clothes fit me, and not try to fit into the wrong size of clothes. So I can surround it with better things, but it's in that category of stuff that just is. And but also for all of us, I'm sure, we were told in school that this was our fault again and again and again. You're not trying hard enough. You're not living up to your potential. Why don't you care? You need to be better organized. And so the idea of saying this is not a thing within my control, not just saying it's not my fault, right, which is an emotional thing,
Right.
but very much like, this is one of the things that is not a mutable element in my control. That is counter to pretty much everything we were told again and again and again, often in very volatile circumstances. So it's really hard to get there.
And you know, that reminds me, like the other advice is like, be kind to yourself, because the odds are that if you have this, as Rebecca's saying, you know, you've had a lot of people be unkind to you in your life and say unkind things and put the worst possible spin on your behaviors. So, you know, part of your task as somebody who is wired in this way is to kind of balance that with extra self-appreciation, which doesn't mean, you know, we're all perfect or we can't improve in various ways. But for all those things, you know, I literally had art teachers who, you know, yelled at me because I couldn't color within the lines. I mean, like the old saying. And,
wow.
And, you know, now I love my art, you know, whether it's writing or painting or whatever, because it doesn't look like anybody else's.
Right.
You know, and that doesn't mean that some art critic is going to think anything of it, but I'm purposely have tried to develop a practice of appreciating the very things for which I took so much abuse as a kid. Tried. I don't live up to that every day, but I try.
I love it.
Maybe just one more version of, I think we're all talking around the same kind of advice about embracing your practices and trying to get rid of those negative tapes that we've had for all of our lives. One of the things that I think we learned from making this book was how amazing our ways of doing things can be. And so maybe like a reframe of some of the same things that have been said here already is that the ways that we do things often look different from traditional advice, and the ways that we do things are often the exact perfect way for us to do them and are amazing, are not like backup techniques. You know, our writing practices are not like weird workarounds that are okay. They're actually like amazing, innovative ways of working that other people have not yet come up with, and that are like ideal that we're lucky to have.
And I think that's the whole message of this book.
It's true.
This book is extraordinary. I want to encourage everybody out there who's watching this. You really want to order this book, especially if you're doing anything creative and you're a writer or whatever. It's just, every page has just these wonderful, comforting nuggets of wisdom about any kind of difference that you might have or you might feel, and just to realize that it's okay to be different. There are strategies you can use, and my strategies might not look like your strategies. I want to thank everybody who came here. I really want to thank Lisa and Chloe for putting together this book. Thank you so much. This is so great. Thank you, Rebecca, for writing the foreword. Thank you, Robin, for writing the piece in here and for all your wonderful novels. I want to say goodbye to everybody and tell everybody that this is going to live forever on our Mighty Blaze YouTube station. So you can tell your friends, you can tell people, they can comment on it, they can watch it, they can tell their friends. I want to say goodbye to everybody, but I would like Robin, Rebecca, Lisa, and Chloe to stay so I can give you a more proper goodbye. Thank you so much, everybody. This was just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. See you all next time.